Hello, everyone. Okay, thank you so much for hanging in there with us today. I will be introducing Joana Ussler. Joana is a part of the digital education team at Lingoda. As a learning materials developer, she creates content for Lingoda's learning materials in German. She holds a master's degree in German as a foreign language, and her thesis was on multilingualism, intercultural, and transcultural learning. Thank you so much for joining us, Joana, and I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Hello all, and thank you so much for having me. So the conference has been very interesting so far, and I am happy to have the chance to contribute. I think you should all be able to see my presentation already. So yeah, I will talk to you about mediation in online language learning today, since this topic has become, and I think is still becoming, more and more important in a society with an increasing exchange between persons with like different linguistic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, and mediation facilitates communication and helps to break down those barriers. That's the agenda for today. And first, a few words about me. So I am part of the digital education team at Lingoda, and I create the content for Lingoda's learning materials in German. And I hold a master's degree in German as a foreign language, as like Daniel already said that. So when we are learning a language in front of the screen, I think it is even easier than usual to leave the tab with the translation tool open, like you know how it works, and then just switch back and forth and copy and paste quickly to get to the translation. And we get nice translations, like for example, this idiom in the middle, it is in German, would translate with the translation tool into something like Rabia was at the cafe with Lynn. She goes home now and says to Lynn, "It was nice with you today." By "I wish you something." So "Ich wünsch dir was" would be translated into "I wish you something," while the actual meaning is by "Have a nice one, have a nice day," something like that. So the translation tool doesn't really work here. Another example would be this expression in French, faire la crêpe, which is translated by the translation tool into "Paola loves to make pancakes in the summer," while the actual meaning is that she loves to get a tan. And now it's your turn. I have an example in Spanish written on the top. And you can guess. So what could this literal translation actually mean? You can write in the chat which answer you think is correct if you have the chat open. For the translation by the translation tool would be, "This afternoon I'll hit you with a pipe and we'll talk." So what could this actually mean? And the actual meaning is that they will call on the phone. They are not angry. As you saw, those expressions or idioms can't really be translated, but there can be a meaning that can be explained, and explaining what those idioms mean is what we would call mediation. The translation is one part of mediation, and the authors of the CEFR have pointed out. So the CEFR is the Common European Framework of Reference. So the framework that organizes language proficiency in those scales, and from A1 to C2 and so on. So they have pointed out in their companion volume from 2020 that in consequence, like they were talking about mediation a lot, but the interpretation of mediation in the CFR has tended to be reduced to interpretation and translation. And but it should not be mistaken for being one and the same. So this is one of the reasons why in the new companion volume, the one that was published in 2020, the authors opted to provide even more information on mediation and include a scale as we know them for the other skills, like from A1 to C2. So what can we learn about mediation from the new companion volume, and what does it mean? The definition that I liked a lot in the new companion volume is here on the left side. I will leave you some time to read through it since it's rather long. In simple words, I would say that mediation is reformulating something that only you can understand for whatever reason, so that another person can understand it. It does not necessarily have to do with translation. So an example would be, you try to explain an idiomatic expression to someone who's not native in the language and doesn't understand it, or even someone who's native in the language, maybe a child who has never heard that idiom before. Sometimes idioms are really weird and not easy to understand. Or you can imagine that you are traveling in France with your friend. You know French, but your friend doesn't know French, and you both hear the announcement on the train. But your friend doesn't understand, so you mediate what you have understood. You explain, kind of. Mediation is also one of the 4 skills or modes of communication that the CFR uses to replace the commonly known read, speak, listen, write. You may know them from exams or something. And in the CFR, they rather use the skills reception, production, or the modes of communication: reception, production, interaction, and namely mediation. Those skills represent, according to the authors, the real-life use of language. And I think it's also noteworthy that reading, speaking, listening, writing are more like activities, while reception, production, interaction, mediation are processes happening while doing activities, let's say, and they describe more what we actually do in real life. And since it is the real life use of language, I'm sure that every one of you is already using mediation daily, either consciously or unconsciously. For my part, I think mostly unconsciously, and then afterwards I learned about mediation as a concept, and I started analyzing what I'm actually doing. So I want to summarize this definition here again. I think we are using mediation all the time because it is the real life use of language. And the real life use of language is also what we want to teach at Lingoda. So we not only aim to have all of our lessons conducted in the target language, we also know that online classes have the peculiarity of connecting learners from all over the world. Maybe even more so than an offline classroom, because in offline classrooms we often find homogeneous groups. For example, when languages are taught at university or maybe other institutions outside of the region where the target language is spoken. So, for example, if someone in West Africa wants to learn German, they can go to an offline school in West Africa, and there they will be learning together with other people, probably from Western Africa, instead of with people all over the world, from all over the world, like it would be in an online classroom, probably. So at Lingoda, we have over 100,000 learners. They do come from all over the world, and even 74% of them are speaking at least 2 languages at a B2 level. So it is this whole plurilingual competence, pluricultural competences going on there. And most of them are learning for relocation, integration. They are learning because the language is work-related or for hobby and social reasons. We also have teachers from 89 different countries, which contributes to this like pluriculturality at Lingoda. So in online classrooms, we can train our ability to mediate. For example, when talking about our cultural experience or about cultural meaning, for example, to other students from different cultural backgrounds or to the teachers. As an example, it might be easy for one learner to understand a certain idiom or a sign because it is used in a similar way in his or her culture. For example, in English, one can say it's music to my ears, and the meaning is the same. If you translate it literally, the meaning would not change. So a German student could use their knowledge to explain the meaning to other students who might have a different background. So this dynamic mix of students and teachers is, in my opinion, mediation at its best. Because with different co-learners, also different mediation strategies are needed. So the flexibility is trained, and like an ample array of strategies is used. So, for example, I am in a class with Louise, who speaks French, and I too speak French, and I can adapt my language to translate an unknown word for her. You can see here, adapting language on the left side as a strategy to explain a new concept, so new vocabulary. And yeah, I can adapt my language. But if I am in a class with Fairuz, I would maybe not be able to use that same strategy because I don't speak Kurdish. So I explained to her that we're doing the same exercise as in page 3. And by that, I can link to previous knowledge, which is also here on the left side as a strategy. For my first example, I also want to highlight that this is using plurilingual competences. The plurilingual and pluricultural competences are also very prominent in the new companion volume. And yeah, they are very much linked to the idea of mediation because they can be used to mediate successfully. Another situation that my colleague at Lingoda brought up is the following. So as plurilingual teachers and learners, we might have more than one common language. So I think in Jelena's case, it was 3 common languages, and those situations can bring up the question of which language to choose to relate the language learning. So maybe one language seems more fit to explain the grammar because it has parallels with the target language, or another might have related words that help to explain, etc. Additionally to the mediation strategies, we also have the mediation activities that are described in the companion volume. So, for example, for the different teachers are a way for students to navigate different references and to see various ways to mediate and explain. Also, not to mention the good example that the teachers or our teachers at Lingoda give by raising the students' awareness for cultural differences and by that demonstrating how to anticipate and how to navigate those differences in the classroom and outside of it, potentially. And we can find, if you look at the slide, the typical teacher activities here in leading group work, so managing interaction, encouraging conceptual talk, and of course also in mediating communication. So facilitating this pluricultural space that is the online learning classroom, or acting as an intermediary, facilitating the communication, in especially also in delicate situations, disagreements that can arise in those intercultural or pluricultural spaces. Yeah, so a dynamic mix of students and teachers with those like ever-changing groups and challenges to facilitate the communication in the pluricultural space is, as I already said, I think a great way to see mediation in practice and also to practice it. Now let's have a closer look at one of the situations that is emphasized a lot in the CFR, which is group work. So mediation in group work, the mediation descriptors are particularly relevant for the classroom in connection with small group or collaborative tasks, as is written in the companion volume. So it is mostly about like sharing different inputs, explaining information, working together, achieving a goal, maybe even though they have different information in the first place. And I also want to highlight this, that those descriptors or those techniques are even more relevant when this is undertaken in a CLAIL context, which means content and language integrated learning. So you can imagine some professional language course in the medical field or something like that, where they are learning the language and talking about professional topics. So which mediation situations and activities can occur in the online language environment? I'm sure you're all familiar with the breakout room feature. This feature can split up the group of 5 learners into smaller groups or pairs, and by that it can mimic pair work like in the offline context. And when there is the chance to communicate with co-learners, I think different questions might be asked. We have seen that actually. And learners can ask each other for clarification, like what the task is about, or they can compare their answers to an exercise. They can help each other by explaining in other words, which again would be one of the strategies of mediation. And of course, there can be tasks in the material that explicitly prompt learners to use mediation strategies. For example, in the material on the left, you can have a look at it and maybe think about what kind of mediation activities and strategies will be used by the learners with this material. So the tasks are to tell your story. Then the other person, while one person is speaking, the other should listen and make notes. And then back in the classroom, they share the partner's story. So not their own, but the partner's story. So on one hand here, we have the listening and note-taking, which is kind of mediation for ourselves, for oneself, because we write down our own understanding of what has been said. And which is also super interesting is that the speaker can show his or her own mediation ability by considering the note taker situation. So maybe as the speaker, when I'm telling the story, I can pause to give time to write, or I can adapt my language so that it is appropriate to the note taker's level. And this is an interesting point for me, especially because as learners, we can show our level of proficiency also by adapting our language level. This is something that I myself forget sometimes because I focus on proficiency, like in terms of pronunciation, grammar, and such. And but it's really not all about that. It can also just be adapting my level to my co-learners level, or pausing to allow them to take notes. Yeah, and on the other hand, of course, we have here the prompt to share the partner story. So this involves relaying information that the other learners don't have, because I was in a group work with this person and only I know their story. So I will talk about that. And by that, I can maybe filter for relevance. I will not like say again word by word what the other person has said. And yeah, furthermore, I can speak, or I have to speak about another person's experience, obviously in an empathetic way, and show awareness of the fact that some questions might be seen differently by co-learners with different backgrounds and experiences. So this is a lot of also mediation going on, or mediation activities going on, just by sharing my partner's story. And here I have for you the descriptors for the note-taking scale, which I personally find very interesting. So here we have A2. Below A2, there are no descriptors available for note-taking, for the note-taking activity. So on an A2 level, the note-taking would be like simple notes when there's a presentation or a demonstration, familiar subject, predictable, and also if the presenter allows for clarification and note-taking. I also have the B1 level, which would be taking notes during a lecture. The notes should be precise, to use them for your own, and the topic should be like within the field of interest. It is like clear, well structured. It's mostly like a list of key points, simple language, and yeah, familiar. You see, it's all still in the familiar sphere, how like it is in B1. And in B2, still familiar subjects, but the big difference is here the selection. So on a B2 level, the note-taking would be more selective, only on points which strike the listener as important. And it also says something about accurate notes. So yeah, the selection is important here, I'd say. And finally, for C1, it is about taking detailed notes during a lecture, very accurate, and notes that could also be useful to other people. So it's about the selection, like making decisions of what to note down, what to omit, and even unfamiliar matters. So it's yeah, very interesting, also on C1 level. And with that C1 scale, I'll end the presentation. We are ready for the Q&A. And as I said earlier, we are all using mediation one way or the other in our daily lives. And I think most of it is unconscious, if I can speak for myself. And I would also like to know, how about you? Yeah, do you have examples for mediation? When are you using mediation? And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joanna. That was great. Let's give Joanna a round of applause, which means to clap enthusiastically. So yeah, we have one question already in the Q&A. So Emily said, what level do you think is appropriate to start using breakout rooms for mediation? For example, ensuring that learners will be able to speak in the target language and be able to retell the story. So what level would be most appropriate to start that?
So my example with sharing the story or retell the story was from a B1 lesson. But I think breakout rooms can be used from A1 on. So then does not need to be any more proficiency than A1. It's just a great way to get into contact with co-learners, to to have more time to speak and to practice even. So I would say from A1 on, with good instructions, it is always possible.
Okay, very good. And you spoke quite a bit about group work, but let's say you're not necessarily a part of any kind of online school or not in any type of language learning environment where there are multiple people. How can you simulate this sort of mediation experience when you're sort of working individually on learning a language?
Good question. Yeah. So mediation also happens when we are reading and trying to make sense of a text for ourselves. So this is also already a mediation activity. And I think even if it's not in the target language, I can always practice mediation in my own language or with a language that I already speak very well, just by maybe translating, maybe interpreting, maybe explaining something to someone that doesn't have the same knowledge that I have. So all of this is mediation. And me as a teacher, obviously, I'm using mediation a lot, but I think we can all be teachers for the topics that we know and that we are experts in.
Absolutely. And it's almost, it almost cements our learning when we can explain something to someone else, right? Like teaching is actually sort of a higher form of learning, I think, in a sense. So when we can teach people who
It is, I
know a
agree.
little bit less than us, that actually helps us to, for the information to really stick there. Yeah. All right. I
Definitely,
don't see
yes.
that there are any other questions, so we will go ahead and stop there. Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. And thanks to everyone in the chat for all your participation.
Thank you.